Sound check 1, 2, 3.
Check, check, check. Check, check, check.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Call this meeting to order, the 16th meeting of the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee of this term of council. Good to see everyone after the break. And before we go through the consent agenda, I will ask for a roll call, please.
Councillor Bradley.
Here.
Councillor Desroches. Councillor Devine.
Here.
Councillor Johnson.
Here.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Conseillère Plante. I know that the councillor is joining remotely. Conseillère Plante. Vice Chair Hill.
Present.
And Chair Brockington.
Here.
You have quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So the city of Ottawa is located on the unceded, never surrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe First Nations people. They have been inhabitants and stewards of these lands for millennia, and we honor and recognize them. Okay, as I said, we'll go through the agenda. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from the 20th of November, 2024?
Received.
Are these meetings minutes carried? Thank you. Okay. Response to inquiries, item 4, we have 2. One is the on-demand accessible taxi cab service. The second being illegal dumping. Councillor Kavanagh, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I would like to ask something about the accessible taxi. And thank you to Councillor Bradley for putting it forward for me. Is it, can I do it now, or would you want to come back to it?
I'll just ask consent of my colleagues. Can we lift this item, colleagues? I see heads nodding. Thank you. Does anyone want to lift illegal dumping? Councillor Vice Chair Hill, consent from committee members to lift that as well? All right. Okay, we might as well just go into this now. So Councillor Kavanagh on the on-demand accessible taxi cab service.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to staff for getting back to me. This is from a resident's experience and not a very good one, unfortunately. So that is why they asked me to put forward these questions. But what we're not getting is, perhaps because this goes to Emergency and Protective Services Committee and it's a transit issue of it's not getting at the issue of how effective this is as transportation. There's a pilot project going on, and I know that they're going to be an assessment of it, but I just want to know if we can get some kind of measurement of comparing it with the OC Paratranspo, because it has been very frustrating for somebody who lives in a wheelchair and must use these services. They are finding the wait times are pretty pretty strenuous on them, especially this time of year. So I'd like to know how, I'd like to get an update right now on how it's going.
Yeah, I don't know do we have any staff that can respond today? Chief Chapman?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor, I'm not sure that I understand the question is related to OC Transpo and the Paratranspo program or the accessibility on-demand taxi cab program.
Well, it's the fact that it does replace Paratranspo, and because it's an option, and want to know, if what the impact is and what the uptake is. Is it replacing Paratranspo, and what if there's been any challenges or barriers that have been identified on this pilot project that can, in terms of getting vehicles and service availability. Our resident has found that that the cab drivers are taking this incentive, but not necessarily following through. That's his experience. So just want to get some information on how that's being monitored.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Counselor, thank you for the question. I mean, there is a clear distinction between the on-demand accessible taxi service and the pilot that Bylaw Regulatory Services is responsible for, and paratranspo still running in parallel, but we have no oversight of the para program. So can certainly connect with our colleagues in OC Transpo and see if we can get you some additional information on that. But as far as the on-demand taxi service, I can say that, and we've indicated in the inquiry response that although early in the pilot, the data so far is showing that there's been a substantial improvement to the program, albeit admittedly still not perfect. We were hoping to see more fully accessible vehicles on the road by now. We've only seen an increase of 3, although we have seen some uptake on the service itself. I mean, before the pilot, we saw between 900 and 1,000 rides a month. We're now seeing between 1,200 and 1,300 rides per month. So there has been an increase in the demand. We do audit the records on a monthly basis, and what we're seeing right now is that the response time, the wait times have increased or have improved, to between 9 and 15 minutes. Again, not to say that outside of the peak times, Sunday night at 11 o'clock, there may be the occasional time where, if you're waiting for a fully accessible vehicle, you might wait 45 minutes to an hour. But that would be very similar to requesting a standard cab, which would be, a 45-minute wait in some cases, depending on where you're calling from. So, I mean, still some improvement to be done. We're in regular communication with the taxi union as well as the brokers themselves. I think everybody's rowing in the same direction. We all have the same interest here. And we're hoping to see that we can get some more vehicles on later this year.
And Chair, if I could just add to Roger's comments as well, just in terms of the efficacy of the pilot, staff will be reporting back to this committee on that data. And as part of the pilot project, we will provide this back at the end of I believe it's a 3-year pilot. I'm just looking over at Roger. Yeah, at the end of the 3-year pilot.
Okay, thank you for that. Counselor, is there anything further?
Yes, thank you. Now, wasn't the pilot project meant to alleviate some pressure from paratranspo? It's difficult when there's, where you're in different silos, and I hope that there will be some comparisons. And is it possible to have a report that brings in that angle?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. Certainly, we can look at that in our annual report, adding some information on Paris program. We'll connect with OC Transpo on that. But again, this isn't to our pilot that we're running for the on-demand service is not to replace Paris service that they provide. The Paris service is a pre-booking service, whereas the taxi pilot that we're running right now is an on-demand service. So it's to ensure that the accessible community is getting the taxi service in a timely manner. So as I said, right now we're seeing between a 9 and 15-minute wait.
Yeah, no, we understand it's not to replace, but obviously it's the same customer base. And so we just want to know how it's working for them. They should have choice. They should have choice of an accessible taxi. And if they have something that's regular and that can be booked, they use paratranspo. But anyway, it's been a bit frustrating. And that's why the inquiry was made. And again, thanks to Councillor Bradley for putting it forward. And I look forward to more information. But I do hope there's some coordination with OC Transpo. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh, for raising that this morning, and Councillor Kelly on this, Adam.
Sorry, I actually wanted to chat about illegal dumping. So is that okay to do now, Chair?
I just want to address accessible taxi cab service first. So on this item, Councillor Johnson, and then we'll come back to illegal dumping.
Thank you, Chair. So just to clarify, I know that when this pilot was first submitted to committee, there had been quite a bit of conversation about the involvement of paratranspo in an ongoing way. So, but yet when we ask sort of questions that relate to the two departments, you very clearly, Director Chapman sort of said, we understand this part of it, and this is the part that we control. So could you help us to understand what the ongoing collaboration is between the paratranspo senior leadership team of OC Transpo and your office to address some of the overlap that is present in this pilot? Because I think when it comes back, you know, I think we had that conversation when it comes back for full review, as the GM suggests, that we anticipate that there will be an imperfectly siloed conversation on this, and we will actually require, OC Transpo as well as likely bylaw to address the user need. So can you help us to understand when it comes back how that coordination is being achieved?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question, Councillor. So I can commit to providing that update as GM Pearl has said. We'll include that in our annual report. We can have discussion at that time. But so we'll include some of the collaboration that's happened with paratranspo on the accessible service. Again, keeping in mind that this pilot that we're overseeing is about the on-demand service, and paratranspo continues to provide the service for pre-booking service. There was some discussion at committee previously about shared dispatch service, and we did engage in conversations with paratranspo staff about taking over the centralized dispatch. The challenge that they have is that they're not set up for that. In fact, the dispatch for para is done through Coventry Connections. So that's who we ended up going with the centralized dispatch service that we have for on-demand service as well. But that's not to say that at the end of this pilot that paratranspo may be set up and might be the opportunity then for them to take over central dispatch of both on-demand and pre-booking service. So there is conversations that are happening around that, but at this time they're not prepared to take that on.
Okay, I was hoping for a reassurance that those conversations are ongoing, because my anxiety would be, of course, that we do a 3-year pilot that doesn't consider the potential for public ownership of some of these pieces. And of course, the result then is that the private companies are well placed to deliver, while para has not been able to perhaps do some strategic thinking about their growth or their potential to take on some of that. So can I have some assurances that those conversations are ongoing and would, in fact, as you say, inform what the recommendations might be at the end of the pilot, that there will be some conversation about what it would look like to allow for a greater public ownership of the program if it's possible?
Mr. Chair, yes, I can assure you that those conversations will take place.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Great. Thank you for those questions. So colleagues, can we move off of the on-demand taxi cab service? No other questions? Okay, we'll transition then to illegal dumping. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I had recently had an issue in my ward, got a email or a call from a constituent saying there had been 8 bags of garbage dumped in the ditch close to their property. I believe it was either them or their neighbor that was told by bylaw that it was their responsibility to get rid of. And the bylaw that was referenced, I believe, was the ditch maintenance bylaw, or whatever it's actually called. I'm sure it's not called the ditch maintenance bylaw. That was resolved thanks to Roger and his team. So I really appreciate the efforts there. But I do fear that similar issues could potentially be popping up around the city, where telling someone that 8 bags of garbage is their responsibility to get rid of would take at least 6 weeks, I believe, with the current item limit and time between pickups. And I read in this response to the inquiry that, and I believe, and this is my question, is if I can be corrected if I'm wrong, if garbage is dumped illegally on someone's private property, unless evidence can be found that links that back to someone, then it is that the private property's owner responsibility to get rid of this illegally dumped garbage?
Mr. Chair, Councillor, thank you for the question. Yes, that's correct. If the garbage is dumped illegally on private property, and there's no evidence to substantiate or identify who dumped it there, yes, it would ultimately be the property owner's responsibility to remove that garbage.
If the property owner could prove that it's not theirs somehow, what would happen in that case? If you can't find any perpetrator, but no, it's not the private property owner, what would happen there?
Mr. Chair, again, Councillor, if it's on private property, if we're not able to identify who's dumped it there, in a case where we could identify who dumped it there, obviously we would ask them to go back and remove the garbage themselves.
Mhm.
But if we're not able to identify who the person was that dumped it there, then ultimately it would be the property owner that have to remove it.
But let's say, for instance, there's a dash cam or doorbell footage of someone dumping garbage on my property. The license plate is obscured. We can't find out who that person is, but we know for sure it wasn't me. Is it still my responsibility?
Mr. Chair, yes, Councillor, it would be the property owner's responsibility to remove that garbage.
We may want to look at changing that. Also, we may want to, and when I look at the ditch maintenance bylaw and it being my responsibility to clean garbage, whether it's a chip bag or a water bottle or a pop can or dog poop or whatever's in there, that sounds reasonable to me. And when I read that bylaw, I don't for 1 second interpret that it would be my responsibility to get rid of 8 bags of garbage illegally dumped in the ditch in front of my house, and again would take weeks to get rid of with the 3-item limit, of course, because I'm producing my own garbage. So I'm hoping that we can ensure some clarity on that for residents moving forward and for bylaw officers going out to enforce that. So I'm not sure if you have any comments based on that, but that is the extent of my comments and questions on the illegal dumping. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, Councillor, just to clarify one point. So if the garbage is in the ditch, it's not the responsibility of the property owner. So that's on city property. So the process that we have in place right now is that Public Works, Road Services would pick up that garbage. Again, if it's on private property, so somebody backs into somebody's laneway, onto the private property and dumps there, that's when it would become the property owner's responsibility to remove.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Vice Chair Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Bylaw Services for the response to my inquiry. Illegal dumping is certainly something that I do hear a fair amount about. In your response to my inquiry, you spoke to how municipalities see a decline in illegal dumping about 3 to 6 months after the introduction of a new garbage limit to enforcement and due to enforcement and education. We're coming up on about the 6-month timeline since the policy was soft launched back in September. I'm just curious if you've seen changes so far since that start in terms of illegal dumping activity.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. We did see a substantial increase in call volumes since September of 2024. Just to give a little bit of an indicator is in 2022 we had 102 dumping calls. 2023 we had 93. Last year the number spiked to 739. But this isn't uncommon when new regulations are brought into effect. So, and not all those numbers were post September or post the enactment of the bylaw. A lot of the increase happens, it started in April actually, when there was a lot of debate over this issue, and there's a lot of public discussion and things and awareness that was happening. So a lot of the complaints started to spike around then. So I'm not sure that dumping on city property or public property has increased that much, although the numbers, the people that are taking the time to call in when they see illegal dumping has increased. But certainly from September with the online service request capability. That's certainly helped with people making it a little bit easier to be able to send in their complaints. So that certainly has helped spike the numbers, I guess. And but at the same time, we've also seen an increase in charges that we've issued. We've seen an increase in the notice of violations that we're issuing. So I mean, all I can say at this point is we're keeping up with it, and we're staying on top of it, and we certainly hope that. Although it's a little early in the program right now, but I know we're about the 6-month mark now. We did see an increase again in January compared to January last year. But we're certainly hoping that we'll see a decrease throughout 2025. So more to come on that. We'll add some information on that in our annual report as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you as well in the report for the numbers you gave on 2022 and 2023. And I understand if it's still too early to say, but with the new year behind us, how many fines did we issue in 2024 for illegal dumping?
So since September of 2024, when the new regulations came into place, we've had 7 charges. We had just over, well, close to 300 calls since September. And we had 11 notice of violations that were issued.
Okay, thank you. And I was glad to see in the report that you had sufficient resources to handle the increases to illegal dumping. Has anything changed since you wrote this report that would require new resources to be allocated to bylaw for the purposes of this bylaw?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. Based on the service request that we've got in 2024, the 739, we feel that the 2 additional resources that we received through the enactment of the bylaws is sufficient at this time.
Okay. And I know it's early days, but do you have an estimate on how much you would look to increase the fine for illegal dumping in parks when that report is brought to committee?
Yeah, so Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor. As we indicated in the report, the only one that we didn't increase was the Parks and Facilities bylaw. All other bylaws that were impacted here, we had increased the short form or the set fines to $615. We did not increase the one for Parks and Facilities bylaw because of the review that's happening now. So when that bylaw comes forward in, I believe it's Q2 of 2025, it's my understanding is it will be in a reenactment. So the set fines will have to be redone at that time. And our intention is to bring that one to be consistent with all other bylaws at $615.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Devine.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Roger, for those answers you brought to my colleagues' questions. I think, and thank you, Councillor Hill, for submitting this inquiry. I think you just answered my first question, which was about trying to see if we're going to bring the fines for parks and facilities in line with the other fines. I appreciate that. Sounds like we're heading in that direction. So generally, while I appreciate the inquiry, I have not received many reports about illegal dumping in my ward, and certainly the ones that I have received have typically been attributed to general contractors doing illegal dumping as opposed to household waste. And that is not likely the result of the change to curbside waste diversion policy. But I do want to go back to my colleague, Councillor Kelly's question, because he described a situation that seemed to me quite reasonable to expect that the city might attend to it. So, Mr. Chapman, from what I understood from Councillor Kelly, if a resident can provide evidence that suggests that somebody else dumped on their private property, but you can't prove who that person was, i.e. if a resident can produce door cam footage, you can't see the license plate, but you can tell it's somebody dumping. Mr. Chapman, you were saying that the city is not responsible for clearing that garbage. It's the private resident who had the dumping, correct?
Mr. Chair, Councillor, that is correct. Yes, if the dumping is on private property, it would be the property owner's responsibility.
And I can understand that if that resident who is the unfortunate victim of illegal dumping, if they can't provide some form of reasonable evidence, we might have issues of, I can understand why we can't provide a service there because we can't guarantee it. But what would be required because I think it's quite unreasonable. If I can show video of a truck coming by dumping on my property, and I'm sure this doesn't happen too often, but if I find it concerning that that level of documentation is not enough to require that the city handle that. What change would be required to enable that kind of situation to provide the resident with that kind of service from the city?
Mr. Chair, Councillor, thank you for the question. Just so I just want to touch on to clarify a couple things. So, I mean, I say that the the property owner ultimately is responsible, keeping in mind that we do conduct a complete investigation. We try our best to try and identify who may have dumped there. The problem with some of the doorbell camera footage that we do receive, or even some of the other type of surveillance cameras that are out there, it's not always clear to be able to get a license plate. So, but there's other things that we look at without getting into enforcement tactics too much. But there are other identifying factors that we look at on the vehicle that we may be able to identify the individual. So we try our best to try and identify who may have dumped there. We've also purchased some of our own cameras that, from a fair distance, about a few hundred meters away, we're able to clearly see the license plate. So right now we have a few problematic areas that we've identified, and we do deploy our cameras in those areas, and we monitor those on a regular basis. So we have had some success in catching people illegally dumping in some of those areas. So, and we do encourage, private properties that have issues around commercial dumpsters and things like that to, if they can have cameras that have clear images, that certainly helps with our investigations. But yes, where we're unable to determine who the person was that dumped on that property, then yes, ultimately it would be the property owner.
No, sorry, I didn't make my question clear, Mr. Chapman. I understand that currently, if you cannot identify the dumper, it becomes the responsibility of the resident. I understand that that's the current situation. What I'm trying to ask is, it would be quite unfortunate for a resident to have this happen to them, even if the evidence they provide can't clarify who specifically did it. It really does, feel to me concerning that resident is still responsible. And so what I'm asking you is, if a resident can show you video that may not specifically identify the culprit, but it's clear that somebody dumped on their property, what would need to be changed to make it the city's responsibility to clear that garbage?
Mr. Chair, Councillor, thank you for the question. I think I understand what you're asking. So, I mean, I'd have to take that away and have a discussion with our colleagues in solid waste to see, this is again making the assumption that this dumping has occurred in a residential area where curbside service is provided. I can have a discussion with solid waste services to see if that's an opportunity where they may allow for additional bags and garbage to be put out at the curb that week. But again, if this was commercial where city services or curbside service isn't provided, it may in fact still remain to be the property owner's responsibility.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll just follow up with my colleague, Councillor Kelly, and maybe together we can advance him, because I share his concern. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, colleagues, for your questions on these two matters. Seeing no other hands, we will move on with our agenda. Item 5 is the Ottawa Fire Service 2025 Station Location Study. We will hold this item for a presentation. Item 6 is status update, Emergency Preparedness Protective Services Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending 10 February 2025. Is this item received? Thank you. Okay. There's no other substantive business. So before we start off with item 5, I just have a few comments to make. We have crested our midway point of this term of council. And since 2023, we have received, reviewed, and approved 28 legislative reports and considered 11 inquiry responses on a broad range of topics. including the Ottawa Paramedic Service 2024 to 2026 investment plan, the false fire alarm strategy, snowplow contractor licensing, as well as updates on both the short-term rental regime and the provincial regime for towing and storing regulations. Our committee has also played a crucial role in securing funding for our paramedic, fire and bylaw, public safety, and other service areas. In budget 2025, this funding ensured the continuation of effective operations by securing 63 new positions to support the important work of the Emergency and Protective Services Department. Speaking of this important work, while many residents enjoyed the Family Day weekend, Emergency and Protective Services continue to operate around the clock to ensure public safety. Bylaw and regulatory services played a key role in supporting public works with snow clearing efforts, ensuring parking regulations were followed to help maintain traffic flow, and clear routes for emergency responders. Despite challenging conditions, our first responders remained dedicated, responding to calls for service. Meanwhile, in the Office of Emergency Management, they coordinated with all city services to ensure support was available and public messaging was unified. So a big thank you to our EPS services during these significant snow events. Finally, I'd like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to you colleagues, committee members, and our staff for your dedicated and collaborative approach in achieving these milestones. As we begin 2025, we remain committed to fulfilling our legislative duties, advancing the items on the council-approved bylaw review work plan, and addressing many important matters of public policy. So with that, we will segue into item 5, which is the Ottawa Fire Service 2025 station location study. We have before us in the committee room our General Manager, Perot. Good morning to you, and Fire Chief Hutt. So General Manager, are you going to start off?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to hand it over to Chief Hutt.
All right, Chief Hutt, good morning to you.
Good morning, Chair. Very pleased this morning to present our updated station location study. I do have a slide presentation if we could have that. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. Okay, the station location study aims to optimize fire station placement, and I apologize. I think I'm a slide ahead, so I'm just going to backtrack. The last station location study that was presented in at committee and council was in 2025, so it is out of date, and that's why we're before committee today. The new study completed today is a 10-year with a 5-year and a 10-year lens to be presented. We continue to meet our response times based on growth, intensification, and data. The last study that we completed in 2025, council approved standards of cover, and you'll hear me say this a couple times, and it's our accreditation process, which we have recently been reaccredited with, and it's our standards of cover, and it's a community risk assessment that we provide all this data. And in the last station location study, we did complete the Canada North Station as well as the Cedarville Road station as well. The new study supports the term of the council's strategic plan to improve emergency response times aimed aligning with emergency response with community needs. Next slide, please. There we go. These studies really take a data-driven approach, strategic positioning of apparatus and resources. What this study is going to look at is it's going to provide recommendations where it's reducing response times in our community by 5 minutes, and time does matter. So if we, from an emergency perspective, if we can get on scene quicker and sooner, that is part of our goal for sure. We look at future trends. We analyze the growth, development, intensification from a planning perspective. So we do have to take growth into future planning and considerations. We also look at response data. We look at our current resources, where they're located. We look at operational factors incorporating feedback and benchmarking as a result of our accreditation process. We also do internal reviews of our facilities, our current stations, fleet distribution, resources. And so really this is not just a recommendation for new stations because of intensification and growth. It is really a service review throughout the duration of our current resourcing and are we deploying in an effective and efficient manner. We also, through this process, we do a lot of consultation with city departments, also taking in consideration the recent Rural Summit results as well. Next slide, please. The recommendation before committee today is obviously receiving this report for information. And then we're also approving the expansion and the renovation of Station 94 located in Manotick, which is currently a volunteer station, and Station 93 to accommodate full-time career members within these staffing outlines. And we'll go through the details throughout this presentation. Next slide, please. So currently before you have a slide, and when we look at growth and intensification numbers, you see when areas start to reach a population of over 400 people per square kilometer, we start to apply through our accreditation and urban response lens. It goes without saying that the more populated an area is, the more calls that you receive. So currently in Manotick, which is supported by our volunteer program, when we apply an urban standard, you'll see in the red, that is the area for an apparatus the first dude can get on scene within 7 minutes and 13 seconds. When we apply an urban response, you'll see the green area, how much more. So you'll see the areas in the white where we're not reaching our response standards in an urban setting. And in the green, you'll see if we apply an urban lens to that area because of the intensification and the growth, it does fill in the gap between Station 47 in Barrhaven and Station 37 in Riverside South. Similarly, if you look at the Greeley area, if currently in the red is a volunteer first on scene response standard, so in a volunteer area, first on scene standard is 11 minutes and 8 seconds. If we apply an urban lens for that area, you'll see of 7 minutes and 13 seconds. You'll see the green area has expanded to support those neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So this is a population density chart that we use. Obviously, we consult with our planning and development colleagues. I did mention already the difference between an urban response and a rural response. Whenever we start to look at populations, and in particular, as part of the recommendation today, if you look at the Manotick area, it's already exceeding that, that 400 population per square kilometer. It's already red. And what this map also shows is it shows the future growth in the areas that we're recommending as well. Next slide, please. This map is a volunteer map, call map. So this highlights, and it's considered a heat map. So it identifies the number of responses that we have in our rural area. And this is not to preclude, when we did our study, we looked at all the city, right from the urban area to the rural area. Although we have high call volumes in the urban area, we are meeting our current standard, and we've echoed that as part of our annual report, that we are meeting our response standards in the urban area. I think it comes as no surprise, but we are seeing significant growth outwards. And through the support of this committee and council, Stittsville, Ward 6 will be online in Q3 and 4 of this year. And what this recommendation is showing is the changing Manotick from a volunteer to a composite, as well as Greeley from a volunteer to a composite. Next slide, please. What this chart illustrates is it just illustrates over 5 years call volume for some of our rural areas. You can see Stittsville Station 81, which we've already addressed, you know, on average, they're responding to over 540 calls in a year. And not to take away from the excellent service, and we're so fortunate to have dedicated and committed volunteers, you also have to look at the retention and the capacity that they have to continue to respond to those levels. And then you'll see Manotick and Greeley shortly after that they're seeing significant call volumes within their communities. Next slide, please. So the funding strategy for this recommendation is we're looking for in 2027 to commence with renovations at the Station 94 in Manotick, with operating budgets for resourcing in 2028. And then we're looking for in 2030 an expansion and renovations to Station 93, which is our southeast end of the city, with operating budget considerations for staffing and resources in 2032. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned this, you know, when we look at population density, there's no doubt the more dense an area is, the higher the call volume, so when we look at it from a risk management perspective, it rates higher on our risk assessment. We also have other calls other than just fire as well, obviously. We have medical emergency, hazardous material, natural disasters, and we also have severe weather events as well, which was taken into consideration as part of this study. Again, higher populations of vulnerable individuals are more targeted, so we have to take that into consideration as well. And resource allocation, ensuring adequate distribution of fire stations and emergency services that cover all areas of the city effectively. Next slide, please. So as we move ahead, we're going to be consulting with our internal partners from infrastructure. You know, when we start talking about renovations and expansions of stations, we'll be working with our colleagues. Planning and development, we have to keep in mind these recommendations are a snapshot in time. We need to review the data that our planning and development and building folks provide to us, because that really helps us project what the future may look for our service. And then obviously working closely with financial services, because budgetary requests will be as part of annual budget discussions and budget process. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that there may be.
Thank you, Chief, very much for that overview. Appreciate it very much. I remember one of my first meetings on the old CPS receiving the old study from 10 years ago. So it's funny how this comes full circle. But as our city expands and grows, we have to make sure that our emergency services are well equipped to respond to all residents in the city. So thank you for this report and the study that went into it. Colleagues, do we have any questions for staff on this item? Councillor Deloche.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thank you, Chief, for the presentation in Riverside South and Finley Creek. As you know, we have two stations, 37 and 32. 32 is in the Leitrim area. I do want to take a minute to thank them, not only for their service to the community in the greater Leitrim Finley Creek area, but also the work they do in the community, specifically with the Rotary Respite Home. They do some fantastic fundraising and outreach in the community. And I think it's a model for other stations right across the city. I do want to talk about the Leitrim station. Obviously, it's a pre-amalgamation station. At the present time, I think they have one lonely but hardworking pumper truck that serves the community. I appreciate that this area is growing rapidly, as is Greeley. Potentially, you could have perhaps had another station that would serve that broader area there, but I accept your recommendations today. But I do wonder if the growth that we have in Finley Creek and Leitrim, if you see additional vehicles perhaps being acquired that would come out of Station 32.
Chair, through you, Councillor, thank you very much for that question. And when we look at this study, you know, and in particular, Finley Creek area, there's many parts of the city that we're seeing growth and intensification, and not only expanding outwards, we're also seeing vertical challenges too with high rises and how that impacts, you know, how soon we can get to residents as well. So these are taken into consideration. Currently with Finley Creek, part of our last accreditation or study recognized that when you look at Finley Creek to the south and then Greeley to the north, there was areas that we were seeing, and this is why this recommendation is before committee today, is that when we say effective response force, it means having enough firefighters on scene to do critical tasking within a certain amount of time. And just because of the travel distance, there was a gap in us there is a gap with us having difficulty meeting our standards of cover. So when we look at Greeley, we're really looking at the surrounding area as well, which incorporates Finley Creek. So if we were to, as the recommendation shares, if we were to staff that with a career complement, we're able to bridge that gap because there will be less response time because you're going to have full-time staff in Greeley as well that can help augment the Finley Creek area. So currently, 32 Leitrim is well serviced because you do have Conray Station 31 and you have 37 nearby as well. So we are currently showing that we are meeting our response data in that area, but this applies for the entire city. It is very data driven. We need to continue to look at where the growth and intensification, we're seeing the growth and the intensification. If we're seeing trends or anomalies, we do have an opportunity to come before committee and as well and share if we're seeing a potential risk or a gap, and we can share those recommendations with committee. So today is a station location study with the 2 recommendations for those stations, but when you look at specific developments like Taywin development, that hasn't been factored into the station location study. There's just not enough information right now, but these would be opportunities for us to come before committee and share if we thought additional resources, apparatus, or staffing would be required to service these areas.
Okay, so that's a possibility then, that 32 would just see additional equipment and staffing potentially as the community continues to grow.
Yeah, I think we're always willing to evaluate the data. What I can share for confidence that right now, Leitrim, even though we are seeing lots of growth and intensification, we are meeting our first on due, which is 7 minutes, 13 seconds, and our effective response within that area. But we continue to analyze this information annually. And if there's anything that does change, we can certainly bring that to committee's attention.
Right. Secondly, that station, as I said, is a pre-amalgamation station. Much of the road network in that area is a rural cross-section road. We're thankfully making investments to make Bank Street urbanized in that area, but the intersection of Leitrim and Bank is highly problematic right now, given its rural cross-section, its rural engineering, the geometry of the intersection is problematic, and the station's located right beside the intersection, right? And I do get comments and concerns from residents like, can the trucks get out? Can they respond in a timely fashion? And I hear today that they can. My question for you today, Chief, is, you know, when we do our transportation master planning, which is coming up, does your team input into that to talk to our planners about the problems that we're seeing with growth and the infrastructure not keeping up with the growth and the ability of our vehicles to move? Again, it was a rural neighborhood in the old days of Leitrim, right? And you've suddenly had that community explode. So do you input into those planning decisions so that again we can match the urban areas with urban infrastructure?
So Chair, thank you for that question. That intersection certainly is very busy. A number of our fire stations, front very busy intersections. King Edward, for example. We do take, whenever we look at our data and our analysis, it does take road network, road travel speed on average into consideration as well. So those are part of our analytics and the data that we look at when we're coming up with our recommendations and suggestions. And so acknowledging that that is a very busy intersection. If there's future ways that we can support, our public works and how things get redesigned, certainly happy to have those conversations. But what I can share with you is that those areas that are highly trafficked areas or populated areas, that is all taken into consideration with our data analysis.
Okay, thank you. Last question is just with Manotick, which is our neighbor in Riverside South. If I understand correctly, the recommendation to expand the Manotick station is based on the population growth in that area. It's not over concerns related to safety of the bridge traffic or what have you. So if you could just underline that what's driving that decision to expand that station is really the growth in the population that we've seen in that quadrant of the city, and not so much a safety concern over, motor vehicle accidents or what have you.
Chair, thank you for the question. There may be competing concerns with the traffic flow with the heavy vehicles in Manotick, but certainly when we, again, I'll repeat myself, when we looked at Manotick, we also have to take into consideration Barrhaven and Riverside South. So it's not just specifically that area, it's that population growth and density and how we can serve and get to our residents sooner and quicker in the most effective manner. So when we looked at Manotick, it's really to help again bridge the growth that we're seeing in the Barrhaven, the Riverside South, and in the Manotick area as well.
Okay, that's all for me today. Thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for those questions. Chief, I'll just ask, when stations 93 and 94 are under construction, do they remain open, or do you make alternate decisions to continue to provide service in those areas?
We work, thank you, Chair, for that question, and good question. When renovations, as is currently occurring in Stittsville right now, the station does remain available. It is our priority that those stations stay active for serving their communities. So we work very closely with the infrastructure and building, construction and design, and we facilitate it in a way that we can continue with the response out of that station, those stations.
Thank you. And my other question is, does the location study examine current stations to confirm that they're still the best locations, given that there's developments and expansions inside the city as well?
Chair, thank you. We have Ottawa, the City of Ottawa, the Fire Services has 45 very strategically located stations, and that is taken into consideration. You may recall the study before the 2015, I believe it was 2008, made a recommendation where it was Blair Road, and then we had one in Industrial, and it identified that those stations there was a lot of overlap there, and there was an opportunity. So, through, again, committee and council's recommendation and approval, we suggested closing one of the stations and rebuilding in an area that would better serve the residents in that area. So that is taken into consideration, yes.
Okay, excellent. Any other questions? So the motion before us is two parts. So one is that the committee receive the report for information. And the second part is that we approve the expansion and renovation of Station 94, located at 5669 Manotick Main Street, and Station 93, located at 6891 Parkway Road, to accommodate full-time on-site career firefighter staffing as outlined in the report, subject to approval through the budget process for the relevant funding year. Is this item carried? Thank you, colleagues. Matter is carried. I'm not aware of any in-camera items. Chris, none? No in-camera. Any notices of motion? Seeing none, any inquiries? Vice Chair?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Over the last week, from Wednesday, February the 12th to Sunday, February 17th, Ottawa saw almost 70 centimeters of snowfall. Bylaw and Regulatory Services plays an important role to ensure that our streets are cleared of snow by enforcing temporary parking bans. Despite efforts from Bylaw Regulatory Services and most residents, some streets this week could not be properly cleared due to illegally parked cars obstructing plows. During last week's multiple parking bans, 10,678 tickets were issued worth approximately $1.1 million in fines. Questions. 1. How many streets could not be plowed in the immediate 48 hours after the February 13th and 17th snowstorms due to illegally parked vehicles blocking the street? And 2. What would the cost burden incurred by the city if a more aggressive policy was to be taken to proactively tow vehicles that are currently being fined for violating parking bans during snowstorms? Would any policy changes be required to ensure such an operation was revenue neutral?
Okay. There's no part 3. For those of you who saw the screen, there's no part 3 to that inquiry. So thank you, Vice Chair. Any other inquiries? Seeing none, and I'm not aware of any other business. We are tentatively scheduled to meet again March 20th. There's some potential date changes this spring coming up, so stay tuned. So tentative now for March 20th, but I'm just highlighting that date may change. So given that the business before us is completed today, we are now adjourned. Thank you.